Hello, and thank you for attending our presentation today as we discuss climbing the leadership ladder, how to navigate generational divide and build lasting teams. To start, I want to mention that I have no conflicts of interest, no financial relationships or commercial interests that I need to discuss. My name is Berger, and I'll be introducing our panel today and giving you a brief introduction to the generations and the concerns that we are going to raise with respect to how to manage different generations in the workplace. First of all, today we're going to talk about defining the major characteristics of the generations in the workplace today, the baby boomers, Generation X, and the millennial generation. We're going to identify several areas where these generations tend to have sticking points based on their preferences. And we're going to talk about a process that you can implement in order to resolve these sticking points. We want to be able to apply these practically, and we're going to give you some examples of how to navigate generational differences. In thinking about the generations, I want to start off by saying that there is no exact divide for generations in any formal sense. This is done generally through surveys that look at behaviors, voting strategies, preferences for purchases, and other survey-related questions that a generation born in a certain range of years tend to respond to. There are also the bridging gaps between generations where you might find a cusp of a generation that might respond in one or the other area. And so therefore, this is not an exact science, but something can be used as a guide when attempting to address generational differences. We're going to be talking about the silent generation. This is going to be generation born late 1920s to 1940s. The mid-1940s to 1960s would be the baby boomers. That's going to be one of the main generations in the workplace that is now exiting the workplace. Generation X, 1965 to 1980 generally, a key group that's coming into its leadership role in the workplace. And the millennials in the early 80s to the mid 90s, really starting to ramp up their influence on the workforce. And then these post-millennials from the late 90s to mid 2000s, 2012, this group is maybe starting to enter the workforce and starting to have an impact. You can see here from this graphic just depicting the workforce, and you can see that over 90% of the workforce is represented by Gen X, baby boomers, and millennials. What we want to do today is think a little bit about, from a leadership perspective, how to manage up to gain opportunities in thinking about the generational preferences of those leaders. How to go laterally with your peers and be an invaluable teammate by understanding how to navigate those concerns and preferences of your colleagues. And then thinking about, as a leader, leading down to be able to manage adverse situations or to be able to bring your team together in an age-diverse workforce. The impact on healthcare organizations is profound. As you can imagine, there are lots of internal challenges. Thinking about the baby boomers' retirement and the workforce shortages we're seeing in our specialty in anesthesiology, or thinking about succession planning into a leader that's going to be leading a new generation and what those preferences and what that leadership might look like. Externally, we see a gig economy. A lot of people that coming in with healthcare needs might not be insured as well as prior generations. Baby boomers are looking to retire, and we're seeing a big increase in their healthcare needs as well. And that is a big challenge to the demands on the workforce in healthcare. We might see three generations in the workforce, but externally we're experiencing those bridging, those border generations, the silent generation and the Generation Z, starting to influence the healthcare through patients, through acting as patients. And finally, we're thinking about this idea of remote work more and more in our society. And some professions like medicine and anesthesiology in particular might not be suited for that type of work. And that's impacting morale and a host of strategies for dealing with that workforce demand. I want to finally introduce our panel today that's going to be giving you some insights into how the generations might uniquely approach work and then how it's going to all be resolved. Managing the revered baby boomers is going to be led by Mary J Njoku. She is Associate Professor of Anesthesiology and Professorship Majescu Professorship in Anesthesiology Education. She's the Designated Institutional Official for Graduate Medical Education at the University of Maryland. Confessions of a Generation X, Maya J. Hastie, is Associate Professor in Anesthesiology and Co-Director of Faculty Development and Career Advancement, Associate Director of Adult Cardiothoracic Anesthesiology Fellowship at New York Presbyterian, Columbia University Medical Center. Managing the infamous Millennials, Mada F Helou is Associate Professor of Anesthesiology, Program Director, Anesthesiology Residency, and Case Western Reserve University School of Medicine. Those three are going to be talking about our three core workplace generations, giving historical events, key features, and workplace preferences for those groups. And finally, bridging the sticking points, unifying strategies will be led by Elizabeth Duggan, Associate Professor of Anesthesiology, Director of Professional Development and Faculty Engagement at the University of Alabama, Birmingham, Hersink School of Medicine. Generally, she'll be thinking about bridging together these challenges that divides generations in the workplace, aligning interests, realizing strengths, and how achieving a vision can be possible. And we're going to zoom in on 4 particular sticking points of the 12 listed here: communication, loyalty, how generations approach meetings, and work ethic. Thank you for your attention, and we look forward to question and answers.
My name is Mary Njoku. I am from the University of Maryland School of Medicine and practice at the University of Maryland Medical Center. I have no financial relationships or disclosures, only life experiences. I have served as the Designated Institutional Official for Graduate Medical Education at the University of Maryland since 2012, where we have 916 trainees, of which 77% are residents and 23% are fellows. The training duration is anywhere from 1 up to 8 years, and 2 more years added if we add in the research years. We have 99 GME programs and 92 program directors, of which the program directors have experience that ranges anywhere from months up to 33 years. I've been a residency program director, a critical care fellowship program director, and a surgical intensive care unit attending, as well as an anesthesiology clinical OR attending. As a member of this panel, climbing the leadership ladder, navigating the generational divide to build lasting teams, the goal is to share a few reflections, provide a foundational understanding of this generation, the baby boomers, and offer an appreciation of the unique contributions and perspectives of this generation that may be leveraged in the workplace. A number of events influence the sensibilities of this generation. Often it is said that the formative years, the first 8 years of a child's life, have a lasting influence on a person's characters and attitudes. However, events occurring during the impressionable age, that is the period from adolescence to early adulthood, when there is greater perception as well as experiences, may have a lasting effect on thoughts, impressions, and behavior. 1954 marked the premiere of Wonderful World of Disney Anthology series, a weekly broadcast featuring Disneyland amusement park, animated cartoons, and live action figures. The American Civil Rights Movement was a campaign to abolish segregation, racism, Jim Crow laws, and socioeconomic inequality. The Vietnam conflict, also one of the longest wars, challenged the unification of North and South Vietnam under a single communist government. And then in 1974, the 37th president, Nixon, resigned in lieu of impeachment after the discovery of the cover-up of the break-in into the National Democratic Committee headquarters during the 1972 presidential campaign. 1963 marked the time when our country mourned together after the assassination of the 35th president, Kennedy. In 1969, Apollo 11 was the first space flight, landing humans on the moon. I posit that these converging events affected the sensibilities of the baby boomer generation. There are a number of key features of the baby boomer generation, but there's no way to acknowledge the baby boomers without recognizing the traditionalists, those born before, those born in 1945. The hallmark of this generation was World War II. This British government Ministry of Information poster, intended to raise morale, highlights the sensibilities of the traditionalist generation, sacrificing individuality for the cause, national unity, trusting in experts, and a clear message of sober restraint. The traditionalist generation gave rise to the baby boomers, whose sensibilities were quite unique. For example, do your thing. Live, act, behave as you want without attention to other people's opinions. Self-affirmation and self-help. This SNL character, Stuart Smiley, of an undefined age, reminded us that I'm good enough, I'm smart enough, and people like me. The American dream was also prevalent, the belief that every citizen has an equal opportunity to achieve success and prosperity through hard work, determination, and initiative. And who can forget Don't Stop Believing, the message of optimism, positivity, and never giving up on dreams. These images and concepts highlight the sensibilities of the baby boomer generation. And now I will move to the number of workplace preferences. Baby boomers hold a number of workplace preferences, and I will highlight the 4 sticking points related to communication, loyalty, meetings, and work ethic. So baby boomers might prefer formal writing skills. Raised in a television era where there were high standards for presentation, items were visual, story-based, concrete, and short. Meeting preferences are in person and face-to-face, and a phone call cannot substitute for another form of communication. Often will flex with technology. Baby boomers express loyalty. If their employment transitions under consideration, it may be better to stay and advance along a career path, but leaving is actually okay for the purpose of a promotion. Regarding loyalty, it's a dual-edged process. For the employee, the costs and benefits of changing jobs later in life are often weighed. And for an employer, it may cost too much to lose the employee. Meetings are used to access information, enhance visibility, create equal opportunities for everyone, and full attention is expected. It's used also to build team cohesion and bonding and to complete critical work. And perhaps teleconferences are expected. For example, I don't know how to manage facial expressions when I don't have a live audience. Baby boomers' work ethic. Work provides excitement and achievement. There are long hours, you come in early, stay late, and then you might take portions of it home. And the baby boomer motto is to work hard and to often play hard. I look forward to the discussion of how these features of the baby boomer generation may be leveraged for success in a multi-generational workplace.
Hi, it is a pleasure to be part of this panel. My name is Maya, and I'm a Gen X. My name is Maya Hastie. I am an associate professor of anesthesiology at Columbia University, and I have no conflicts of interest or financial disclosures relevant to this presentation. Gen X are those who grew up in the 80s, who had their formative years in that decade. That was the decade of big hair, questionable fashion. That was also the decade of technology that developed into what would become addictive video games. It was the time when music and learning became personalized and portable. And it was also the time where women were told that it was okay to have fun. The 80s were also the time of tragedy that was the result of failure of safety, failure of policies, or of corruption. In that same decade, we saw the technology and the growth of technology that would make the 2000s possible. We also saw the world coming together to feed the world, to end endemics, and where walls were not everlasting. Not all Gen X in the workplace are going to have the same lived experiences. I grew up in Beirut during a war. However, most of the Gen Xers identify as citizens of a global world. They have witnessed changes in technologies. They have lived through stories that transcend generations and cultures. For this group, change is possible and nothing is permanent. How does that translate into what we want from the workplace? Gen Xers want efficiency. They want the flexibility in their workplace, and they want to find the purpose. How does that look on a day-to-day? When trying to communicate with Gen Xers, they tend to prefer an electronic format where they can review notes, where they can provide summaries. They expect an acknowledgement of their communications in the next few days. They favor personal but professional tone in the communications. And they are very sensitive to gender biases or other biases that can seep in, and consistency is #1 rule. When scheduling meetings, Gen X tend to favor email. It's more efficient and flexible over in-person meetings, and virtual over in-person. They would like to see an agenda. When dealing with Gen X at work, provide a structure, provide an agenda to the meeting, and respect the time. Allow the timing of meetings and communications to be during work hours. Because Gen X have learned with time how to protect their personal time, and they will avoid having meetings after hours. For their professional development, to entice them, give purpose, discuss goals, and show the ultimate goals that they are aiming for. Gen Xers have done the yoga retreat, have taken the meditation classes, and they know wellness is not a personal choice, it's a systems problem. Don't expect loyalty from Gen X to an institution, expect loyalty to values and to a mission. And they value the community they work with, they value the people they work with. For Gen Xers and for all workers, it is difficult to work in a place where they notice violation of their core values. So aligning the core values of the workplace to those who are working in it. But the picture is not as simple. How different is a 20-year-old in any generation? In a survey of about 250 workers, they asked them how they view others, and they asked them how they thought others viewed them, or what we call meta-stereotypes. What was surprising in this is that for most people, they thought that others viewed them worse than they actually did. What does that mean for our workplace? It should give us pause. To avoid the stereotype threat, when we start saying us versus them, when we start lumping people in their generation, we perpetuate a behavior and we avoid engaging with others. Generational divide is when the stereotypes on generational divide are perpetuated, that can lead to ageism, which is a form of discrimination. We want to encourage diversity in our workplace of thought, of outlooks, and of lived experiences. And be curious, if a conflict arises, what are the causes? What could be behind that conflict with my colleague? Is there something beyond generational gap that can explain this conflict? And for most of our colleagues, providing a clear and transparent vision, forward direction, and common goals for our workplace will go a long way. In a recent article, Amy Gallo describes that when you ascribe or assume that a conflict with your colleague is only about age difference, it can make it worse. And she gives us great advice that when she's dealing with conflict and to cut through my instinct to stereotype or judge coworkers of other generations, I have a mantra. That was me. That will be me. I look forward to the conversation that will follow. Thank you.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining our exciting panel on generational awareness. Today, I'm going to be speaking about managing the infamous millennials. And full disclosure, I myself am a millennial, so there's that. I have no financial relationships, and I will not be discussing the use of any drugs. So today I'll be talking about generational awareness in the context of my leadership journey. And since we're all leaders of our own initiatives, this subject is helpful for all of us to master so that we can accomplish our personal goals. So a little bit about my context. I took over a struggling residency program a little bit over 3 years ago. We had a handful of citations when I started, and all of them were rooted in the lack of faculty and lack of resident engagement. And this was also in the context of greater departmental and institutional leadership turnover that contributed to these sentiments. So our team's goal was to increase faculty engagement, increase resident engagement, thereby increasing their wellness and ultimately helping to improve the quality of the patient care that we provided. So to do that, we needed a very clear vision and a very specific mission. We also needed to retreat and kind of reflect on our core values that would help us achieve the goals that we set forth to accomplish. So kind of with that stage set, I'm going to move on to speak a little bit more about the millennial generation before returning to the story. So millennials are currently folks who are aged anywhere between 25 to 40, most typically, and I've selected some of the key events of our youth here. One of my earliest memories watching the news with my parents was that of the Oklahoma City bombings. Also, the September 11th event was definitely very big in my childhood. We've also had victories like electing our first Black president and setting the trend globally. We also institutionalized gay marriage for the first time in Massachusetts during our youth as well. So with those key events in mind, and as we move forward, we'll look at some surveys that were sent out for millennials, asking them what makes them unique. And then since I'm going in the end, I'll again compare those responses with Gen X and Boomers to kind of just bring it all together. So again, this survey was a little bit less than a decade ago, and a quarter of millennials, about 25%, said that technology is something that set our generation apart. Also music, pop culture, being tolerant and civic-minded were all things that were listed. The baby boomers, on the other hand, really focused on work ethic, morals, loyalty, respectful values. And Gen X described themselves as conservative. But the beauty of Gen X is that they're somewhere in the middle. They share some in common with millennials and some in common with boomers. So like millennials, they identified as being very facile with technology. And like the baby boomers, they described themselves as having a good work ethic and being very respectful. Now, the one common thread between all three generations is definitely not surprising considering human nature. We each thought that we were smarter than the other generation. And that's not surprising. At work, though, things change a little bit. So when millennials were surveyed about what makes them unique at work, their response was that they were sociable and friendly at work, but they really emphasized the fact that they are creative, think outside the box, open to new ideas, open to trying new things. When baby boomers were asked the same question, they focused on their strong work ethic, being able to handle a crisis, taking on responsibility easily, and they very much highlighted their communication skills. Gen Xers finally said that they take extra time to finish a job, that they are competent, ethical, confident, and take on responsibility. So when we look at the slide a little bit more closely, we see that Gen X truly shares more in common in the workplace with the baby boomers than with the millennials. And it's worth pausing to ask here if that's just related to number of years being in the workforce, as to what criteria are being highlighted, or if it's truly a generational thing. So a little bit more about millennials in the workplace. We definitely prefer a flat corporate structure and a lot of management transparency. And the reason for that is millennials focus on efficiency and on producing high quality results in as fast of a time span as possible. And that's probably likely related to growing up in a digital age. And so we like to move quick, hence the desire for immediate feedback, because we can improve in real time when we obtain feedback in real time. And it also helps facilitate the team-oriented workplace that we prefer. So with all of those differences summarized, we might ask ourselves, how might these generations interact when they're together in the workplace? And so we see a unifying opportunity if we examine the areas where generations naturally tend to come apart. In other words, the sticking points, if we examine those and understand those, then there's an opportunity to unify our multi-generational teams in the workplace. So from the millennials' perspective, what are the preferred communication strategies? So like we mentioned before, instant messaging, text messaging, that's the preferred strategy because it gives the result the fastest and keeps the factory line moving. In terms of loyalty, I should slow down here a little bit and say that millennials don't necessarily feel that leaving a company or leaving a career is necessarily a bad thing, as long as we find the place that's best suited for us that we want to spend the rest of our careers in. And the reason for that is when boomers entered the marketplace, there really were a lot of benefits offered by organizations. And as Gen Xers started entering the workplace in millennials and technology, all of these long-term jobs started to become a lot more project-based. And so companies really decreased their benefits. And so the attitude of loyalty towards a company really changed because of the new workplace environment. And so that's a little bit about the differences there. As far as meetings go, millennials love to keep it interactive. If the meeting is to relay information in a unidirectional manner, millennials end up feeling like that would be something they could have read online, as opposed to coming to a meeting. A meeting in their mind is for soliciting ideas, brainstorming solutions together, just having a discourse about the agenda. And so it's very easy to lose their attention if it's not interactive. Also of note, millennials don't consider multitasking to be rude in meetings, and so sometimes we don't always have that insight, especially when a member of an older generation is running a meeting, that we need to slow it down and maybe not multitasking that way. And finally, work ethic. Millennials grew up in a digital age. They have no problem completing duties at home, whether it's later or at any time. We're just used to being on the internet all the time, but we prefer a little bit of flexibility during daytime hours as well. So in other words, millennials will work after hours so long as they're guaranteed some flexibility, and they place their emphasis mostly on a high quality deliverable, more so than on the specific hours that they're in the workplace. So bringing it back together to our story, when we took over our program, we needed to draft a very inspiring vision to help everybody improve the program and move it forward. And I kind of represented our vision as Bora Bora. You know, where are we going? We were going to Bora Bora. And to do that, we needed a very well-defined mission. So the mission is, how are you going to get to Bora Bora? Is it by plane, by canoe, by private jet? So the mission is what provides clarity and a set direction for team members. And it's so specific that it truly feels like a strategy. And so to make this happen, we sat down with our residents. We drafted a completely resident-driven vision. And the program director and myself sat down and broke down that vision into a series of steps that would allow us to accomplish the vision. And in breaking it down to those steps, we identified 16 different focus areas that needed work done between education, admin, and some other subjects. And so in order to expedite our progress, we needed to engage everybody in the department to help. And so we built multi-generational teams, senior attending and a junior attending, a senior resident and a junior resident. And so those multi-generational teams were then allowed to volunteer for various projects to complete them. And as program leadership kind of walked with these teams in their successes and coached them along, this is specifically the point where I became very acutely aware of the importance of understanding generational differences and knowing how to navigate them. And so this is where I really became very highly interested in this subject and started to gain a lot of experience in that front. And the biggest lesson I learned was that there is one common quote shared with all generations. And only saving grace is that millennials will soon have Gen Z to pick up. Thank you very much for your attention. Please don't forget to use this chat box, and we look forward to hearing from you very soon.
Good afternoon. A sincere thanks to IARS for extending us this offer to present on the multi-generational workforce, and to my co-panelists for their generational summaries. Very likely, at least some of their perceptions resonate with you and reflect the challenges you observe or experience in your own workforce. As an example, this excerpt captures a printed commentary between a senior and junior employee struggling to understand each other's work attitudes and behaviors. A variation of this conversation is often heard at our workplaces, frequently used to describe the friction between colleagues or between colleagues and learners. Interestingly, however, this excerpt was published in The Atlantic in 1911, outlining the perceived challenges in a multi-generational workforce that included the missionary and lost generations, far before the generations we present today. Across time, there are consistent reports of generations perceiving or perhaps misperceiving their cohort as being uniquely different than other generations in the workforce. Today, we will review organizational evidence outlining generational research to have a better understanding of our differences and our similarities, such that we are able to seek collaboration, express appreciation, and bridge the commonly referenced generation gap. For the first time, 5 distinct generations of employees are in the workforce. While this lecture touches on the generations most represented in medicine today, the workplace is rapidly shifting to include more birth cohorts than ever before. To improve our work environments, we need to both define and understand the intergenerational differences in work attitudes and motivators. An improved understanding of our workforce leads to better recruitment, retention, succession planning, communication, employee engagement, and conflict resolution. Currently, workplace generational research has led to 2 theoretical camps. The first is labeled the generational cohort or social forces theory. During their formative years, as you've heard from the previous speakers, each generation experiences a series of historic and political events, socioeconomic changes, and/or technology shifts. The theory hypothesizes that these events act as the basis of a shared set of attitudes, beliefs, and values. Researchers in the lifespan development perspective, however, speculate that the differences between cohorts are not unique to the events surrounding their birth years, but are better attributed to life cycle. For instance, 20-year-olds today may share much in common with 20-year-olds in the 1970s. Personality and attitudes are shaped by life experience and exposure as versus generation-specific events. Each of these theories offers a workplace advantage if proven to be true. If unique events do impact each cohort and influence their personality and attitudes, we have created a framework to develop, motivate, and augment performance. If the second theory is true, however, that individuals develop as a result of their life cycle, organizations can build programs to meet worker needs over time. This also curbs presumed generational differences and limits generational bias and stereotypes in the workplace. Currently, the bulk of workplace generational research focuses on 3 themes: differences in personality that impact work attitudes and performance, how these variations in work values and attitudes impact expectations of the workplace, and how generations differently experience motivating factors to complete and perform their work. Personality is defined as an individual's preferred or typical way of behaving, thinking, and feeling. Research indicates that individual differences in personality do affect job performance and job satisfaction. The Big 5 traits have emerged from decades of research and have persisted across time for their ability to simplify an otherwise overwhelming number of traits. They also demonstrate cross-cultural applicability, and they are able to predict work attitudes and outcomes. If there are significant differences in personality between generations, we would expect this to potentially predict differences in generational work attitudes and performance. The studies examining personality differences between cohorts offer a confused picture. Small studies do show significant differences in personality subtraits and subgroups. However, large studies and meta-analytic findings, which examine humans more broadly across cultural and geographic lines, reveal a different picture. Personality differences between generational cohorts are not scientifically supported, and the differences that do exist between us appear to be more likely due to age, career stage, life cycle, representative cultural influence. Consistently appearing across scientific literature, personality is contextual and appears to adapt due to age, environment, social roles, and life events. Examining 132,000 participants in the United States and Canada, and the study then being repeated in Germany, Italy, Portugal, Croatia, South Korea, and most recently in the Netherlands, personality changes over time as we age. We are more open-minded in our youth. We grow more conscientious and agreeable with age. Men change very little in the spectrum of emotional stability traits and show a small tendency towards increasing extroversion. Women, on the other hand, show an increase in emotional stability with age and demonstrate a slight decrease in extroversion. The difference in personality that we perceive as generational are perhaps not generational at all, but instead the result of changes many of us experience over the course of a lifetime. Are these shared experiences then not an open door for increased appreciation and understanding of other cohorts? Work values refer to employees' attitudes regarding what is acceptable at or should be expected in the workplace. Recognizing that this data is mostly limited to Western cultures and is again somewhat inconsistent, potentially there are small differences between cohorts. Boomers generally value job security within their organizations. They value company loyalty. They're willing to pay their dues to get ahead. They express an affinity for the company goals. They have a strong desire to remain as a member, a term labeled organizational commitment. High work centrality means that one identifies with their work role and sees work as an important part of their life. Again, boomers appear to attach more importance to the role of work than the subsequent generations. Boomers and millennials appear to be more willing to work overtime than Gen Xers. Again, though, this difference is very small. Boomers are more likely to respect authority and traditional values in the workplace. They express wanting to be compliant with work rules. In contrast, younger generations tend to place less value on traditional work hierarchy and employee conformity. Finally, job satisfaction scores are slightly higher in boomers and millennials than the Gen Xers. Motivational drivers are the factors that energize, direct, and sustain behavior in the individual. Undoubtedly, this is a key consideration in work environments because if we are motivated by different factors, organizations need to provide multiple development strategies and career opportunities to bridge the gap. Extrinsic rewards are those that occur outside of oneself and can be tangible, salary and benefits, or intangible, power, praise, recognition. Generally, extrinsic rewards only motivate to a point, and this is consistent across the generational cohort. When examining specific non-monetary extrinsic motivators, boomers indicate they are seeking positions that provide a degree of power and recognition, Gen Xers career progression and advancement, and millennials the opportunity to achieve. Is this, however, unique to generation or perhaps just due to career stage? Family-work balance appears to be a more important motivator for Gen X than millennials. Recent studies have actually considered the impact of children as a confounder in this measurement, and accounting for those with and without children and the ages of the children, Gen X and millennials still show a higher preference for a balance of work hours to provide for non-work time. Intrinsic motivation theory demonstrates that we are increasingly motivated by jobs that are interesting and provide autonomy. Particularly for Gen X, autonomy is a key driver in job selection and acceptance. Social connectedness is the third component of intrinsic motivation. Not surprisingly, most employees prefer to enjoy some level of coworker connectedness. The researchers on millennials, however, is inconsistent. Some studies suggest that millennials are content to work independently, while others suggest the opposite, that the millennial workforce seeks jobs that allow for high connectivity and socialization. Perhaps most critical to our understanding of motivation, individuals, regardless of generation, seek meaningful work. We are motivated by seeing the results of our efforts as they apply to the greater world. Takeaways: as we seek to work more cohesively, where differences exist between us, the data indicates that the effect size is small and generally much different than the stereotypes would have us believe. And given these findings, the National Academy of Science, Engineering, and Medicine published a consensus statement in 2020 indicating that categorizing workers needs by generations is poorly supported by research, and that the continued use of these categorical misconceptions may lead to bias and stereotyping. NASEM does recognize that employees' needs and goals change and that individuals require independent consideration to promote meaningful and productive careers. While multiple frameworks are available to reconcile workplace differences, the generational sticking points, as reviewed by the previous speakers, can be easily approached by the 4+1A model, built out of generational literature and augmented by facilitation, mediation, and negotiation work. The structure is easy to remember and can be broadly applied across a variety of situations. The first of the 4 A's is acknowledge. Create an open forum for discussion. Identify the sticking point and open the conversation for equitable participation and discourse around the rising emotions that surround the issue. Ideally, departments willing to invest in formal facilitation training may have an internal advantage when issues arise. There are also multiple options to become more versed in teaming, psychological safety, and DEI to better open these conversations and reach the acknowledged issue. The second A is appreciate. Several leadership books and business articles call this the why, not what. For any of you versed in negotiation theory or trained in facilitation, you are more familiar with the concept of separating the position from the interest. A position is the surface statement that expresses a stand. It is the what we want. This is not to be confused with an interest, the underlying motivation or the value driving the position. This is the why we want it. The why allows us to better appreciate the other party's needs, their motivations, their values. And as a result, we can brainstorm novel options that meet all of the generation's interests. The third A is accommodate. Use strategies to accommodate the varied needs and values of a unique faculty. For you Gen Xers, harken back to our childhood book collection and create options for a choose your own adventure story. Open the doors to better cater to the unique needs of individuals in an environment. Allow faculty to choose among options. Go American League and play the designated hitter. Leverage the strengths of each generational cohort to play to the business advantage. Put the DH in the game at the right moment. Rely less on stereotypes and traditional hierarchy. Cater to the strengths of the players to cultivate successful teaming and collective intelligence. And finally, consider mixed media artistry. Where possible, seek solutions that mix and match the best of ideas to bring the generations together. Rarely a decision will need to be made that is not flexible. If this is required, ensure it is made out of business necessity, an action, decision, or practice that, if not pursued, will cause the business to lose competitive edge, damage trust with patients, or cost significant irreplaceable resources. The final of the 4 A's, accept. At times, each of us recognize that decision must be made to move forward. If the first 3 A's are followed, acceptance is often easy. Deemed procedural justice, organizational psychology emphasizes that the acceptance of a decision is not only based on the actual outcome, but our evaluation of the fairness of the process used to make the decision. Voice is the opportunity we have to express our ideas, concerns, and perspectives at work to those making the decision. And finally, allow for a mechanism to reevaluate the decision at a time in the future. This allows us to accept the current solution and move forward. Finally, in each of these steps, incorporate the +1A, aspire. Remember that each of us, regardless of generational cohort, aspires to make a difference in the lives of our patients, our colleagues, and the world around us. Working in pursuit of this goal provides meaning, and meaning is the common ground we share. The 4 A's create the framework. At each step, the +1A allows us to find opportunity to aspire towards something great. Remember, change is inevitable. Each of us are capable of change and will experience a lifetime of modifications that make our trajectory unique yet shared. Be cautious approaching generations as unique constructs. Instead, approach individuals as unique contributors.
Hello, everyone. The remainder of the time is dedicated for Q&A. We just wanted to leave some time for participants to perhaps bring up real life scenarios or extra input, feedback, expansion of the information provided for all the panelists to comment. So please feel free to either use the chat box or raise a hand or unmute.
I wanted to ask to Dr. Njoku, oftentimes we hear this presentation about the millennials and their technology interest, and yet, a lot of the baby boomers and traditionalists that are in retirement seem to be much more active on social media and comfortable with technology than some of the generations in the middle, myself maybe at times. I wonder, how do you kind of reconcile for the baby boomers in the workplace that they may not be seen as technologically interested, but yet have a lot of capability in that area?
Thank you, Jeff. That's an interesting question. I think one of the things that drew my attention to that concept you've shared is what happened during this most recent 2 years of the pandemic, where we really were in a hurry to switch all the formats that we had used in person. And I found that all the way from the most senior, I'll use the GME analogy, I found all the way from the most senior physicians all the way to the most junior so appreciated the opportunity to connect using technology and receiving resources and adapting all of their formats to this. So I think it's funny that it was, even before the pandemic, I remember people asking if they could come to the meetings remotely. And at the time, the answer was no. And I think there's no way that we cannot accept hybrid formats anymore or accept the use of technology to facilitate doing the work that we do. I find it also more efficient. And also you don't have to leave your house in order to do it. Just kidding. But I do think that the adaptation is because it has helped people achieve things in their workplace more than anything else.
Mada, I'm not sure if you can see, but it looks like Dr. Baker may have a question for us.
Yeah, I do. It's for you, Dr. Duggan. While I was listening to you speak, this sort of us-them mentality, I think that's sort of one of the word choices. It jumped to my mind that humans seem to be very prone to in-groups and out-groups, no matter what, no matter where, no matter when. And so I wonder if our generational differences are an us-them sort of in-group, out-group phenomena that's very part of a human thing to do. And it's not generational, it's just, we are this age, we are like we all do TikTok, so we're that group. And I don't do Facebook, so I'm the other group. And so bam, there you have it. What do you think?
I think you've hit it spot on. There is a lot of literature that you're exactly right, as a human race, like the sense of being included, right? And so by defining boundaries, it means you're either included or excluded. And so I think a lot of the literature points out that that's just an oversimplification of cultures, right? Races, generations, genders. I think we have taken it to the extreme now with politics, but it really does. I think you're right. And so I think one of the biggest things we have to do as a group is appreciate each other's strengths, but be willing to call out. We share more in common than we may otherwise believe. And each time we say that out loud, I think it reminds all of us to break down those boundaries and barriers that keep us separated and really, unfortunately, have a very negative impact on certain proportions of the population. And if we ever want to change medicine, we're going to have to say out loud that we're not willing to accept those boundaries.
Yeah, thanks. I was sort of seeing it the same way, just because it's everywhere. And from my reading, it's very hard not to crack too.
I think we all get sucked in, right? I mean, I just literally got a Twitter account, I think it was 2 weeks ago, and it was so overwhelming to me. And I kept saying to myself, I'm not a millennial, so I shouldn't be able to do this. And so I caught myself in that pattern of thinking it's really easy, right, to do it, even though you hope that you're above that messaging. But I think you're right. You have to catch yourself, and you have to kindly, nudge your colleague when they may say something that you think, needs to say, hey, wait a minute, we should be more appreciative of our similarities.
Thank you for catching that. And pardon me, Dr. Baker, I got caught up by the chat box, but that's an excellent point. And that's why we were hoping with this panel to start maybe posing the question, is there a systematic way to think through any time that these differences pose themselves, and is there a systematic way to kind of resolve these sticking points as they appear? So I see another question for Dr. Duggan from Liz Whitlock. Dr. Duggan, I think you made the point that many of the generational differences are driven by age. Are there ways to enhance age-related traits, maturity, maybe, in yourself or in colleagues? Example, enhancing organizational loyalty, if that is felt to be a good thing.
Certainly, I think that if you look at organizations, one of the things that we study a lot is person-organization fit or person-environment fit, meaning how do we kind of identify with the environment you're in, right? So if one of the values of that environment is organizational loyalty, I think we can promote that, you know, knowing that that's a relatively positive value, as long as, of course, we're then taking a step back and helping the individuals within the organization find their place, right? And so some of the things that we know that help people engage in their workforce is, actually, Dr. Berger talked about some of these yesterday: transformational leadership, inclusive leadership, equity, justice, I think is one of the things that is probably underrated, but is a great way to get people to feel more included and excited about participating in their organization. So to your point, I think if there is a value that is adapted by an organization and appreciated by the people within it, I think there are ways to foster that, but it requires some study and some work. And frankly, I don't think we assess these things enough, right? So really actually doing a scientific measurement of the way that people are interacting with their organizations so that we can take active steps to improve those behaviors and attitudes.
If I might just add on to what Dr. Duggan said, I've presented my segment of this panel in multiple venues, and some of them were to generations, either millennials or those more junior. And I would say that a lot of them don't really recognize that there is the question of generations in the workplace, or that this is something that needs to be bridged. So I think for the much junior medical students, residents, faculty, perhaps even being educated on it would help enhance the maturity, or at least broaden their perspective on how these things are perceived. I remember the first time I was called a millennial, I didn't know what it was. I said, "What's a millennial?" And they said, "You know, everybody born in this age group, we're talking or teaching about you, you know, in these classes." So I started researching what that was, and I really didn't know what it was. And then I figured, you know, if I was going to be called a millennial, I might as well own it and start, you know what it's about and start working with it, make it work to my advantage. And so I think education can really go a long way, especially with younger faculty, because we're always very eager to learn and eager to help. All right, I see another one in the chat box. When boomer generation faculty sign up to attend a conference, they seem to be very committed to attending that meeting as a professional obligation. Dr. Helou, do you feel like the millennials have the same approach to the conference as they sign up to attend? I don't have anyone particular in mind. So I would say, unfortunately, probably not so much. So what I would say that what I found helpful to help increase my resident attendance is just kind of communicating with them and making sure that I understood what they wanted out of the conference. So if they found the conference to, quote, add value, then they would come. But the problem was they didn't always know what added value. So there was a little bit of communication that needed to happen on my end to show them the value in every conference that was very carefully selected for our grand rounds, for our education series. And once they understood why, I found that their attendance was a lot higher. And it's very interesting because many of the articles call millennials Gen Y, not like the letter Y, but WHY. So Y for everything. And so I feel like when they know why, you know, a conference is being held and they see the value in it, then they definitely turn up with very good commitment to those meetings. And I see we still have a few moments here, and I see that we have experienced faculty in the Zoom room. So my question is, oops, sorry, I'm going to pause that thought because we just got one more in the chat box. Dr. Siddiqui says, "Thank you for your talk. It is said that it is the ability of a generation to get outraged, which differentiates them from another one. And these are sociology shaped by their unique experiences. Can we address this particular facet in order to raise awareness of issues such as bias? So Dr. Siddiqui, I just want to make sure that I understand your question well to kind of pose it to the panel. So do you mean that it's been said that some generations are able to maintain their cool a little bit better than others? And that this is important.
Thank you. Sorry for phrasing it so just in such a difficult way. What I really meant was that certain generations get outraged by infringement of rights than others, and this has been written about in sociological literature. And they do address the fact that we can actually, there isn't really a divide between generations. We can actually address the unique facets of those generations. And this is one of the most important ones, where the younger generation, for example, our medical students, will stand up for many more infringements of, for example, a woman's rights in the workplace. Whereas an older person like myself will probably say, well, this is the way it was. But I could change that behavior if I address the facet behind it. So could we change behaviors is what my point was.
Who would like to take this one? Or I can.
I can give a small perspective because I think that all 20-year-olds are the same across generations. So someone who's 30 years now is probably going to be thinking and acting the same way as a 30-year-old thought 40 years ago, in a way that there's a lot of idealism, there's a lot of wanting to change the world and to make the world a better place. But that doesn't necessarily change, but as Elizabeth mentioned, it does get we learn how to mature with time, and whether it becomes more of a less of an extrovert or we tame that emotional thing. I think what Dr. Siddiqui here points out to is that we can still learn a lot from each other, and that it is a good reminder to see the fervor, the passion in a younger generation, is that for me to remind myself of, yes, this is why we went into medicine, and to allow myself to be reminded of that, basically. So I think keeping that humility in front of everyone, that there is a lot for me to learn from someone else, and to be curious about what's driving them and what can push me, can bridge further that gap. I wonder what others think too.
Dr. Hastie, I think you said that very, very well. And actually, as Dr. Siddiqui was speaking, I kind of thought about the acknowledge, appreciate, and accommodate steps, because as Dr. Duggan was saying, she said, as long as those first three happen, usually everything else gets a lot easier after that. And so even though it's a little bit challenging that somebody is very, very fired up over something that might not be the biggest, the biggest thing that we've experienced over years, at least just acknowledging that, yes, once in my past, maybe I did feel the same way about something like this, and then appreciating their actual stance, that maybe there is some value in what's being brought up, and kind of accommodating where accommodation is possible, but then where it's not, maybe drawing some boundaries. And I find that particularly with millennials and Gen Z, defining very clear expectations goes a very long way. And what I frequently tell my residents in advance is, I told you that, these were the four things, and they know in advance. So if there is, the parameters are easy for them to function within. And I think, my chairman's on this call, but he does that pretty well. Sometimes I'll walk in and I'll be very, very fired up about something that happened. And he'll be like, you know what, I was just like you 20 years ago, let's talk. He always starts with that. And it makes me feel a little bit better. It gives me something to look forward to be a little bit calmer. So I think just in that very small negotiation, conversational part, a lot of the emotion can be brought down, and kind of tempered, so to speak. And hopefully by setting that example once or twice or 3 times, it then gives them something to emulate in their own personal growth as well.
You know, just to build on that for 1 second, I realize we're close to time, is one of the things that they teach in the coaching world when someone is elevated or escalated is never to ask them why, right? Why did you do that? Why are you feeling this way? You know, why would you say that? Because why immediately puts judgment onto how we are perceiving someone else. So using simple statements like, you know, tell me more about your feeling, right? Your anger, or why, you know, the emotion you have behind this. And conversational theory has shown that if you start with a sentence, tell me about this, explain more of this to me, that you can diffuse a situation very quickly. So I also think you've opened the door to exactly what the other panelists have talked about, which is this opportunity to acknowledge what the issue is, and also to understand, right, the why position. What are they really upset about? What is the motivator or the value that has been transgressed that is upsetting to them? Because really, very often we can find that we have a shared value around so many more things than we think we do.
I see we're coming up close to time. Are there any other questions for any of the members of the audience? I don't know if the Zoom's just going to automatically lock us out.
I don't think it will. I think we're okay to call it. That was.
Okay.
I want to thank Mada for Dr. Helou for organizing the panel. It was a fantastic opportunity to explore a new issue that really impacts all of us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for everybody for joining too. This was so fun to plan and to work with you.
Thank you, Mada. Thank you, teammate.